Welcome to the Coast to Coast podcast, brought to you by Play Picks and the Lines. Coming to you from the West Coast, Josh Lander, joined as always by my guy on the East Coast, Nate Weitzer. We are jumping into these MVP odds for this 21-22 season. Nate, we'll jump into some of those best bets that we like and look at a couple of guys maybe to sit on as well and wait for that season to come around before you do bet on them. But as always, if you do still need a FanDuel or DraftKings account, head to fdpicks.com or dkpicks.com. Find all those listings in your area, such as what we're about to talk now. Nate, let's jump into those MVP odds.
Yeah, it starts with the odds I'm reading on DraftKings. Luka Doncic is the favorite at plus 380, followed by Kevin Durant plus 600, Joel Embiid plus 700. You have Giannis at plus 900, as is Steph Curry. Then Damian Lillard plus 1,400. The reigning MVP Nikola Jokic is plus 1,500, as is LeBron James. At plus 2,000, you have Trae Young and James Harden. At plus 2,500, Devin Booker, teammates Anthony Davis and Russell Westbrook, as well as Kawhi Leonard for some reason, even though he's only going to play maybe 12 games at the end of the season.
Vegas is looking for the people who are not reading the news at all.
Smart money there. And plus 3,000, Jason Tatum, Donovan Mitchell, Paul George. I'll also throw in John Morant at plus 4,500. Those are the reasonable looks in the preseason. But like you said, Josh, yeah, MVP is really something to watch as the season progresses. These odds don't shift much unless we have some big injury news. And sometimes it's best to just kind of see a guy rising and anticipate an injury to another favorite, a la Joel Embiid. So I'll just start with the guy I would bet on if we're talking preseason, who in my opinion is the most durable. Giannis Antetokounmpo, obviously he's won 2 of the last 3 MVPs. His numbers were almost identical in that third season, 28 points per game, 11 rebounds per game, 6 assists, 57% from the field. His PER was down a little bit, but still one of the best in the NBA, and he finished second in value above replacement player to the MVP, Nikola Jokic. So if we see any let up from Jokic this year, I think, plus the media exhaustion isn't there to vote Giannis 3 times in a row. I think he can get back at the top of that list. And he's just once again being disrespected with these odds, both him and his team coming off of a finals win and a finals MVP. They're both plus 900. The Bucks are to win the title, Giannis to MVP. And I don't know how much they look at these things, but just the perceived being third banana to the Lakers and Nets is certainly going to motivate them. They obviously have to be playing very confidently, and Giannis just seemed to figure out the entire game like Neo in the Matrix in the finals, averaging 35 points, 13 rebounds, 5 assists, shooting 62% from the floor, getting to the line 14 times, and hitting 9 of those shots. If he can fix his free throw shooting, it's pretty much game over for anyone trying to guard him. And what I'm looking for, aside from the durability, is how much he gets up for these matchups with other premier guys like LeBron and KD. I think maybe we'll see him take on a more of a role trying to defend them one-on-one, more of a leadership role in that sense. And, also be a leading candidate for Defensive Player of the Year, which he's won both in the past.
Yep. Yeah, 100%. It's like you said, when we're talking about these awards preseason, especially, we're kind of looking at what could happen. What's the best case for someone to win it? What's the case where they don't win it? And that's kind of how I look at each of these. And, starting with Giannis, I think, to your point, like, it's almost we come back around full circle. Part of the narrative for him last year and not winning it, in my opinion, and I think voters would, if they're being fully honest, would agree, they saw him play in the playoffs, 2 early exits in a row before last season for Giannis. And there's no way that didn't work against him in the regular season. There's no way these guys were going to say, we're going to vote, and gals, we're going to vote for Giannis to win MVP after he tricked us the last 2 seasons and put up stinkers in the playoffs. And it was just some weird, ego narrative there for writers. No offense, Nate. So, in that case, I'm going to go ahead and say it's come back around. He won the finals. He's proven it. And if he puts up numbers similar to the seasons that he did the last 2 or 3, as you mentioned, Like there's no reason to think that he shouldn't at least be in the top three. And at plus 900, all the way behind guys like Luka and KD, who we'll talk about, even Embiid, who we'll talk about, has worse odds, essentially, like better odds rather, not to bet on, but better odds for him to win it. You got to like Giannis to come back around. So moving on to the guy that you brought up as the favorite, Luka Doncic, talking about narrative. Last year seemed like it was the year for the Luka narrative. A couple things that jumped out to me that actually probably are working against him, in my opinion, are the fact that last year, he carried this team. They were, a very, very good offensive team, very bad defensive team, because they were sort of a further extension of Luka. Very, very good on offense. Was able to keep them in the top 10 in offensive rating for almost all of last season, and finished up there in the top 10. And then in terms of the defensive rating, it was awful because Luka doesn't really bring much on that end of the floor, and they didn't really have much. But the fact that they went and they won the division for the first time in, I believe, in 11 years. And they had the best win percentage that Dallas has had in roughly the last 5 or 6 seasons last year. And Luka still came in 6th in the NBA in the MVP voting. And he had a couple stretches where, he was really bad. His plus minus was like around -20 at times in a couple of different games early on when the Mavs were struggling. So he really took himself out of it early. And the case for him is that he'll be, a couple of things in my opinion. One, if he starts strong and remains strong throughout the season, we know he's going to play if he's healthy. So he's also going to be in there in terms of getting minutes and providing for his team to the extent that Giannis will. And then the fact that J. Kidd is there might actually help him, considering that Rick Carlisle, in my opinion, was a big reason that the Mavs were so consistent every season and took a lot of that credit in terms of that narrative around the Mavs. He's not there anymore. I think J. Kidd, as we've talked about, is often seen as not, somewhat of a joke in terms of his ability to coach in game during the games, his updated in-game strategies and adjustments, not something that we've ever been impressed with. So if Luka's able to, carry this team similar to how he did last year, he might be doing it despite his coach rather than, in tandem with his coach, as was the case with Carlisle.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with Carlisle that hurt him so much last year is it contributed to the narrative that Luka was acting kind of like a spoiled child for the first half of the season, arguing with his coach, which he continued to do throughout the season. But the first half especially, his body language was terrible. His leadership was terrible. He was constantly whining to the refs. And it just did not facilitate leadership for a Mavericks squad, which you can expect from a 21-year-old kid who's been painted as the golden child his whole life. So he's really going to have to hammer voters over the head with some incredible numbers, I think, to come through as the favorite this year, especially with Jason Kidd, who is not loved in the public eye for other reasons besides his basketball acumen. So, they really are going to have to light it up on offense. We expect their defense to be much worse under Kidd, which I guess could help Luka putting up some of those 40-point triple-doubles that, again, would just really hammer it home that says, okay, this guy's the best offensive player in basketball. Let's give him the award.
Yeah, but at plus 380, if he was closer to 8 to 10 to 1, I'd feel really good about those odds. Anywhere below 5 to 1 or so, not feeling it.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I'll move on then. Take us to Kevin Durant. I know we want to talk about a couple Nets players, not named Kyrie, who are up and reasonable to consider for this MVP voting. Durant and Harden, we kind of have to talk about them together just because there's the possibility that they take votes from each other, right? We've talked about that with LeBron and AD in the past. Once AD went to the Lakers, it kind of seemed like LeBron's MVP chances would go down just because he now had one of the top, let's say, 7 players in the NBA in Anthony Davis. Well, same case for KD with James Harden, in my opinion. So why would he win it? Helping his narrative for the season, I think he's the consensus best player in the NBA. We've already deemed him one of, if not the best offensive player in the history of the game. And we actually saw, in those Warrior seasons, what he can do as sort of a 7-foot all around the rim defensive player as well, which really does help him. I do think that defense comes into play, especially when the backbone of your team, in terms of, as I was saying, Luka's offense and defense were replicated by the Mavs in general. I think think when you're a defensive player and your team puts up good defensive stats as a result of you contributing the way KD is so important to his team's defense, which doesn't really have a true solid center out, on their squad. I do think that helps. You'll see him flying around on defense, which will help as well. And look, he's averaged for his career about 28, 7, and 5 or 27, 7, and 5, right? So if he's able to put up those numbers this year, this team does take the number 1 seed. They win 60 games. I think he's the favorite. So I think the case for KD, and honestly, like he's up there with my best bet with Giannis in terms of value that you're getting combined with who's most likely to win it. I think those two, you kind of mentioned up top, those two are the favorites to win it. If Giannis is not the best player in the NBA, KD is, and 1A, 1B, however you want to slot them, they're going to face off in the regular season a couple of times, and we'll see if KD does bring it this year in the regular season. We know Giannis will. But yeah, I think working for Durant is the fact that he's already the best player in the league. He's going to average close to 28 points. And if he does that with 60 wins, I think you can probably book him for that one.
Yeah, but if you're telling me I can bet him plus 600 to win finals MVP, I'm on board. I'm not taking him in the regular season. I don't think he's fragile. I don't think he loafs in any way, but I think he's very intelligent about sitting out games, resting his body. And we just saw the Nets come up short because the workload was too high on him. He's not a guy who necessarily is going to go out and try to play 70-plus games, which I said is a prerequisite for winning MVP. And his teammate, James Harden, really the first bad injury of his career last season. He was the smart money bet for MVP before that. The Nets won 16 of 18 games, including rampaging through a West Coast road trip with KD out, Kyrie playing sparingly, and James Harden just lighting up defenses. They went 29-7 when he was out there. They averaged 119 points per game versus 101 without him, and 5 more assists per game. And he has been an Iron Man prior to that. You look at his games played in Houston, 78, 73, 81, 82, 81, 72, 76, 78. I would trust him far more to just say, I'm going to go out there every night, especially if Kyrie remains out. He says, you know what? All right, I got this. I'm the point guard of this team. We're not getting any other help in the backcourt. I can't just sit out and let somebody else carry it. He's the favorite to lead the NBA in assists per game, projected for 24.7 points and 10.7 assists. Those aren't necessarily blow you away numbers, but I think guys who aren't too big into the analytics, if there are any left in the NBA panel, will look at him and just say, you know what, he's had the biggest impact. If the Nets, like you say, win 60 games, get that top seed, I think it would be a bigger case for Harden than KD.
I don't know if it's a bigger case for Harden, but I agree that the incredible odds at plus 2,000 versus 600 for KD is definitely why, right now specifically, if you're betting on a net to win the MVP, you're definitely taking Harden, just because why wouldn't you if you think it's so close between them who could win it? It might come down to which one of them plays more games, what have you. But I think the thing going for Harden that you said, and the reason to take him at plus 2,000 is because he'll be the facilitator. Even if Kyrie comes back, he's not the point guard on this team. James Harden is the point guard on this team. And Kyrie would definitely be playing an off-ball role, which would mean, you see the usage percentage for James go way up. I definitely would probably right now rather bet on him than KD. But I think if all things go to plan for the Nets, KD's the guy who comes out looking like the MVP of the league. So it's just not worth the money right now. But I don't know. What do you think about anybody in Philly, Nate? You got any best bets?
Speaking of games played, Joel Embiid. I mean, he's been trending up in terms of health and was almost there. He was probably ahead of Jokic. He was probably going to win MVP when he went down again with a knee injury. I mean, betting on him in the preseason at these odds is really just going out on a limb saying something's got to change. It reminds me of Rob Gronkowski a few years ago being like, I'm going to draft him this year. He's going to stay healthy, I swear. Yeah. It happened like once. So, a broken clock. MVP for Embiid maybe this year. I mean, his numbers are just staggering when he's out there for a big guy to go 50, 37, 86 on his shooting splits, second in usage rate. He brings up his whole team in terms of points per game, in terms of 3-point percentage, drawing doubles, is an absolute terror on the defensive end when he's engaged. And I think he's going to be motivated and engaged with this Ben Simmons saga going on. maybe they're able to flip Simmons for a playmaking guard that makes the Sixers, they are just one great shooting guard away from being among the top 3 teams in the East. And if they can get that 1 seed again and Embiid makes it through the whole season, if, then yes, he could win MVP. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me 100 times, shame on Joel Embiid, right? Last year I was ready to throw money on him before his odds got too low, right? They were still around at one point when we were talking about him, Nikola, and Harden as the top 3 best bets last year. I remember that episode like it was yesterday. Embiid was still at about plus 600 at that time of the season. I think he was a clear favorite. Once again, for MVP, we'll probably wait. I think you can still get Embiid at plus 700, close to once 2022 comes around, it'll still probably be some pretty nice odds. I think, that right around the All-Star break is when you start to look at 3 to 5 guys max that are now capable of winning the MVP, and they'll still have decent odds close to that. So for Embiid, the thing that scares me is even when we get to that point in February, let's say he's played 99% of their games, doesn't mean that he's not liable to get hurt. The number one thing working for him, and it's always going to come down to injuries for Embiid and for the 76ers and how far they can go is how healthy is Embiid, because when he's in, he's probably the best defensive player in the league in terms of how he impacts the game. He's the guy standing 7'3" that's not going to get moved out of any position and is going to be standing there waiting for you if you're coming in. I mean, you saw what happened when he was not able to guard the paint against the Hawks last season in the playoffs, and Trae Young just did whatever he wanted in the paint because there was nobody else to really take that on. So the 76ers have been one of the top 3 best defensive teams in the league the last 3 years. If they continue that stretch this year, Embiid's going to put up his 28 to 30 points a game when he's healthy and get his 10 to 12 rebounds a game as well. You got to consider him, in my opinion, at plus 700. That's why I believe he's about 3rd right now. That is where I would say his chances of winning are in terms of most likely. It's about 3rd at plus 700. I'm still going to wait because I think I can get Embiid for that closer to the All-Star break. But yeah, what do you think about, I guess the other only other center in the league that I could see challenging Embiid for something like this is Jokic. They've separated themselves as the top 2 centers in the league. And I'm wondering, do they sort of battle each other? Is there some sort of helpful narrative in that centers are have been sort of tarnished recently, and the fact that 2 of these guys are coming and being the most impactful guys on their team? What do you think of Nikola as well at like plus 1,500 right now?
Yeah, can Jokic run it back? Absolutely. Like I mentioned, the analytics are overwhelmingly in his favor. He finished first in all these advanced things: PER, win shares, box plus minus, value above replacement last year. And then you throw in the narrative that Jamal Murray might be diminished even when he does come back. I mean, last year that was kind of the icing on the cake for Jokic, that they still went 16-8 after Murray's injury and still grabbed that 3rd seed. It really, for me, depends on how much he's done this offseason to stay in shape. Has he just been running little harness races in Serbia, or is he even better shape? Because that's why he won MVP last year, because he went hard in the gym and came out and was able to sustain that kind of workload, and I believe play 81 games, which is just an overwhelming stat to just throw at people as the games played. And I think plus 1,500 for him to repeat is a fine bet. I would place a little money on that. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's interesting with him. We were talking about a lot of these guys like, not really worth it. I think the 2 guys let's say 3 guys right now that it's worth it to take preseason because their odds probably are going to go down is Nikola, number 1, because I could see him coming out, averaging 30 and 13 at the very beginning of the season, just coming out on a tear and proving that the Nuggets are still going to be a top 4 seed in the West. And if he does that, then his odds are going straight down. Same, in my opinion, with Giannis. I think he'll come out roaring. We'll see those odds at plus 900 diminish. And same with Harden. I think, he's going to have another good season. And by the time, December comes around, he's already averaging 25, 11, maybe 5 or 6 boards. His odds are going to go down as well. Probably the same case for my guy out here in the Golden State, Steph Curry. Right, plus 900. I don't think his odds will necessarily get any better for you than right now, because I do think we're looking at another 30 points per game season for Steph. I believe he's 2nd right now, actually, in terms of most likely to lead the league in scoring this year. Bradley Beal still number 1. But if that is the case, the narrative for Steph is what actually helped him last year when they went on a tear to make that play-in game, and then obviously they didn't make the playoffs, so that system kind of sucked. But either way, he was the reason that they were even able to get that close to a playoff berth. And look, this year for him, it's going to come down to, is there a second banana on offense that can actually help them? Surprisingly, they finished in the top 10 in defense last year. It was the offense that struggled because when Steph wasn't on the floor, it was lights out, right? It was done. And if Jordan Poole is going to come in this year, I know we'll probably talk about him for a potential futures award at some point. That's a guy that could come in, be a ball handler off of Steph, not rely on Steph to have that usage rate so high at around 30% like it was last year. That could be good for him. But really, I think, once again, the narrative is not going to be there for Steph because I don't think this team is going to be in a place that it's taken seriously as a playoff contender or somebody that could really make noise in the West come All-Star break. I think we're looking at a much closer to 500 record for them. And despite 30 points a game and, upping a bunch of his efficiency numbers and still looking like the best Steph we've ever seen, it still isn't going to be enough in terms of how Golden State really fares in the league overall.
Yeah, he's the third favorite to lead in points per game, and that's the bet I would take with Steph. It's plus 700 at DraftKings.
Okay.
But at the same time, I don't think we're going to see necessarily, to your point, a repeat of him just gunning the way he did last year because he absolutely had to.
Right.
Jordan Poole's going to be better. Clay will come back at some point. His points per game will dip a little bit, whereas the two favorites, Bradley Beal and Luka Doncic, are going to be gunning for 35 plus every night because their team doesn't have any other options. I would not bet on Steph to win MVP as much as I love him. He's a fantastic offensive player, but I am not taking that bet whatsoever. And then the best of the rest, I guess, are the guys I would at least just keep an eye on. I'm not saying preseason. I think Jason Tatum has a shot if the Celtics really turn it around. I mean, he just continues to get better at an incredible pace. And Donovan Mitchell, if the Jazz finish first again, the league has no answers for him. I mean, not the same playmaker as Luka, but just as unstoppable in terms of being a scheme buster. And there is a narrative for Paul George. All three of those guys at plus 3,000. Just watch how the Clippers open. Because if they actually stun people and are still a top three team without Kawhi, Paul George is going to be in the thick of that discussion.
Yeah, as far as preseason betting, those would be the three that you would take right now. All those narratives are possible for all three of those guys, and Mitchell, George, and Tatum, that there's a likelihood that they could be putting up 28 to 30 points themselves. And if they have their teams in a top four seed, Utah, they're still likely to win probably the most games in the West. But the other two there, if they're able to get the Celtics and the Clips into a top four seed in their respective conferences, averaging that amount of points, you got to say, well, they carried them there, and that's probably good enough at that point. I think right now that those three are probably the best in terms of your odds preseason so that you can get some bang for your buck before they come in and start ripping and roaring. So that is all the time that we have for a nice long MVP episode. It's going to be a fun race all season, Nate. I'm sure we will touch on this again for sure, as those odds will change a bit here and there as we see what happens once the season actually tips off. We have another preseason episode coming up for you guys as well. We're going to be talking about a bunch of other awards outside the MVP, so we'll get a look at some sixth man and some rookie of the year, etc. And until we are back for you guys, happy betting.